The earth trembled beneath the march of an empire. From horizon to horizon, banners whipped against the sky, a forest of spears rising and falling like waves. The drums of Persia thundered across the valleys, so deep, so heavy, they seemed to beat inside the chest of every man who heard them. This was Xerxes' army millions, they said. Warriors drawn from every corner of the known world, archers from the steppes, cavalry from Bactria, warships blackening the seas. A storm so vast, so unstoppable, it seemed less like an army and more like the weight of destiny itself. And yet, waiting for them, in a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, stood just 300 men. 300 against an empire. Pause for a moment. Imagine this. If you knew death was certain, would you stand your ground, or would you run? The Spartans did not run. They stood in a place the Greeks called the Hot Gates, a jagged corridor of rock where the sea kissed the mountain cliffs. The pass was so narrow that only a few men could fight shoulder to shoulder at once. To Persia's endless host, it was a funnel. To Leonidas, king of Sparta, it was hope. And the world remembers this stand not because it was victory. It was not. The Spartans would all die here, and they knew it. That is why the story endures. Because sometimes, the greatest triumph is not to live, but to refuse to kneel. Listen, can you hear it? The clatter of shields locking together, the hiss of spears scraping stone, the low growl of men who have chosen to die on their feet rather than live on their knees. This is not just a story of kings and armies. It is a mirror, a reflection of what it means to face the impossible and choose defiance. What would you do if the world itself bore down on you? Would you lay down your arms? Or would you whisper, as Leonidas did, then let it come? Welcome to Thermopylae. Long before spears clashed at Thermopylae, the world was already divided in two. On one side, an empire without rival. On the other, a scatter of fragile city-states, forever quarreling, forever proud. The Persian Empire, forged by Cyrus, expanded by Darius, now ruled by Xerxes, the self-proclaimed king of kings. From the Indus River in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west, his banners stretched across mountains, deserts, and oceans. Nations bent the knee, gold poured into his palaces. His armies so vast that rivers dried when they drank, moved like tides, devouring all who resisted. And against this Greece, not an empire, not a nation, just rocky soil and stubborn hearts. Athens with its democracy, Sparta with its iron discipline, Corinth with its merchants, Thebes with its rivalries, each city small, each jealous of the other, each ready to fight its neighbor as quickly as any foreigner. By all logic, Greece should have fallen in days. But here is the paradox. What should have been weakness became strength. The Persians ruled by decree, one throne, one law, one will. The Greeks lived by choice. In Athens, citizens raised their hands to vote. In Sparta, warriors bowed to laws older than kings. Divided, yes, but free. And freedom does something to the soul. It makes men stand taller. It makes them fight harder. Years before Thermopylae, Persia had already tested Greece. At Marathon, Darius's army landed in overwhelming force. They expected easy triumph. But farmers, craftsmen, and hoplites, armed with bronze, hurled them back into the sea. Persia was humbled. A scar cut into imperial pride. That scar burned in Xerxes. He did not want conquest alone. He wanted erasure. He would blot out the Greek cities, their temples, their people. He would burn democracy itself to ash. So he gathered an army unlike any the world had seen. Herodotus claimed millions. Perhaps it was less, but to those who saw the horizon darken with dust, it seemed as if all the world had risen against them. Archers whose arrows could hide the Sunday, war elephants from lands most Greeks had never imagined. Ships enough to choke the seas. Now think of this. You are a Greek farmer. standing in your olive grove. Word reaches you, Xerxes is coming. His host blots out the earth. Rivers run dry beneath his march. Would you feel courage or despair? Most felt despair, but not all. In the councils of Greece, voices rose. Some cried for surrender, others for retreat. Then came the decision someone must hold the pass at Thermopylae. Someone must stand in the gap, no matter the cost, so the rest of Greece could prepare. And in Sparta, when the question was asked, the answer was never in doubt. This was where Leonidas entered history. A king, yes, but more than that, a man who understood necessity. He knew Persia could not be defeated head-on, but they could be delayed. They could be shown that resistance was not only possible, it was inevitable. He chose 300, not the youngest, not the strongest, but fathers all with sons to inherit their names. Sparta would endure, even if its warriors did not. Consider that for a moment. Would you march to certain death, knowing the only reason you were chosen was because your line would not vanish with you? This was not despair. This was duty. And so, as Xerxes' ocean of soldiers rolled westward, Leonidas and his chosen prepared to march north, to Thermopylae, to the hot gates, to immortality. Greece should have fallen. And yet it didn't. Because 300 men were about to remind the world that freedom, once tasted, cannot be conquered by fear. In Sparta, there was no debate, no trembling hands, no whispers of surrender. When word came that Persia advanced, the answer was as sharp as steel. We march. But Leonidas did not summon all of Sparta. He chose 300. Not the youngest, not the strongest, not the most ambitious. He chose fathers, men who already had sons. If they fell, their bloodlines would endure. Their city would live on. Stop for a moment. Imagine being that father. Would you accept such a summons knowing your death was already accounted for? The Spartans accepted. They did not argue. They did not flinch. In their world, death was not a thief to be feared, but a companion when duty called. Picture this: a boy, no older than 10, watching his father strap on armor. Bronze gleams in firelight. The boy does not cry. Spartan boys are taught never to weep. He only stares, memorizing every scar on his father's hands, every dent in his shield. He knows, though no one speaks it, this may be the last time he sees him. The women of Sparta line the streets as the warriors gather. No wailing, no pleading, only the words every Spartan mother gave her son. Come back with your shield, or on it. Leonidas himself was no exception. He tightened the straps of his scarred armor and walked at the head of his men. A king, yes, but in Sparta, kings bled beside their warriors. The march began at dawn. Sandals striking earth, shields slung, spears catching the morning sunday. Their steps echoed like a drumbeat of inevitability. Villagers stood along the road in silence, watching men walk not toward life, but toward legend. Would you have joined them? Or would you have stayed behind, safe in the comfort of home? As the column wound north, allies gathered. Thespians, Arcadians, Corinthians, drawn by the gravity of Leonidas's defiance. This was no army of conquest. It was a shield, raised for all of Greece. At night, fires burned along the road. Sparks leapt against the dark sky, illuminating bronze helms and stern faces. The men sharpened their spears. They sang not dirges of despair, but hymns of courage. To Persians, such laughter on the eve of death would seem madness. To Spartans, it was freedom. And Leonidas? He knew the truth. He had heard the tales, rivers drained by marching men, bridges of boats spanning seas. He marched not in ignorance, but in full clarity. He was not leading his men to survival. He was leading them to sacrifice. And still, his step did not falter. As they approached Thermopylae, the cliffs rose sharp against the sky. The sea crashed close by, restless and eternal. The air smelled of salt and sulfur. This was the chosen place, the choke point where empire would be humbled by the courage of a few. That night, Leonidas walked among his men. He did not promise victory. He simply looked into their eyes, and they understood. Their fate was sealed. Their names already etched in history. Thermopylae was not to be a battlefield. It was to be a monument, a grave chosen willingly. And here lies the paradox. These men did not march to live, they marched to die. But in that choice, they became immortal. Thermopylae, the hot gates, a name that already tasted of fire long before Leonidas arrived. Here, jagged mountains pressed against the restless sea, leaving only a ribbon of road, narrow, merciless. Steam hissed from sulfur springs, rising in ghostly veils, as if the earth itself exhaled through hidden wounds. To travelers, it felt like standing at the threshold of Hades, and this was where Leonidas chose to stand. Why? Because here, numbers meant nothing. Persia could bring 1,000,000 men, but only a handful could advance at once. The cliffs and sea would funnel the tide, choking it into spears waiting in the pass. The hot gates turned weakness into strength. Now imagine yourself among those few. The sea in your ears, the smell of sulfur in your lungs. You know what is coming. A wall of men so vast, the earth itself will shake. Would you steady your grip on the spear, or would your knees betray you? The Spartans steadied their grip. And they had more than courage, they had the phalanx. A wall of bronze shields, overlapping, unbroken, each man's shield guarding the brother beside him. Behind them, spears longer than a man thrust outward in unison. One body, one will, a living fortress. In Sparta, to drop your shield was the greatest shame, not because you failed yourself, but because you failed the man beside you. With your shield or on it, the shield was life. The shield was brotherhood. At Thermopylae, that brotherhood became legend. Now picture the Persian army as it approached. Dust rose like a storm, darkening the horizon. Banners snapped in the wind. The ground shook beneath thousands upon thousands of feet. To any rational man, the sight would crush the heart. But not here. The Spartans tightened their line. Shields locked. Spears bristled. The first Persian ranks surged forward, expecting to sweep the Greeks aside. Instead, they slammed against bronze like waves against rock. The crash echoed through the cliffs. Spears pierced, shields shoved. Men screamed. The narrow pass became a furnace of flesh and iron, wave after wave. Again and again, the Persians pushed. The Spartans held. Can you hear it? The rhythm of the clash, shields colliding, spears striking, voices roaring in defiance. Thunder trapped between mountains. Xerxes unleashed his immortals, black-cloaked, masked, meant to terrify. But even they were mortal here. In the choke of the pass, their ranks shattered like all the rest. Their name became a bitter joke. And here lies the paradox. Xerxes brought the world to crush a few hundred men. Yet at Thermopylae, the world itself was reduced to a trickle, strangled by the land, broken by discipline. The hot gates became a teacher. It whispered, "Strength is not in numbers. Strength is in unity." For 2 days, the greatest empire on earth was held at bay by the courage of a few. Thermopylae was no longer just a pass of rock and steam. It had become a symbol, a beacon. Proof that even when the many surround you, even when death is certain, a few unyielding souls can hold back the tide. The third morning broke over Thermopylae. Crimson light spilled across the cliffs like a prophecy. Below, Persia stirred. Hundreds of thousands woke at once. A living ocean, tightening armor, raising spears. The sound of it like thunder tearing out of the earth. From his throne, Xerxes looked toward the pass. Today, he thought, the Greeks would break. The signal was given. Drums thundered. The first wave advanced. They came like a tide. Rank upon rank. Shields flashing. Spears leveled. The ground shook with inevitability. And yet in the narrow throat of the hot gates, a wall of bronze awaited. The Spartans, Shields locked, spears bristling, faces calm. The clash was thunder. Shields slammed, spears pierced. Screams echoed between the cliffs. Dust and blood filled the air. But the line held. Persians expected fear. Instead, they found defiance, pushed forward by the ranks behind, crushed against bronze that would not yield. Step by step, the Spartans drove them back. Can you imagine it? Your shield pressed against your brother's, the roar of thousands bearing down, the air thick with sweat, dust, and blood. Would you falter? The Spartans did not falter. They sang. Their war songs rolled across the cliffs, mocking the tide that sought to drown them. Every verse a spear thrust. Every note a refusal to bow. Xerxes scowled. He ordered in his best the immortals, cloaked in black, faces hidden, said to be deathless. They advanced with precision, but names mean nothing in the jaws of Thermopylae. The immortals bled like any other. Their ranks faltered. Their pride shattered against bronze. Hours passed, bodies piled high. The pass itself clogged with the dead, turning Persia's numbers into chains. Still, the Spartans pressed forward. Still, Persia fell back. Then came the arrows. Tens of thousands of bowstrings drawn at once. The sky darkened, swallowed by a storm of shafts. A Greek cried out, "Their arrows will blot out the sun." A Spartan laughed. "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." Think about that for a moment. Would you laugh, knowing death was falling from the sky? The Spartans laughed, and they fought in the shade. Arrows rained like night itself. Shields shuddered. Spears splintered. Men screamed. But when the storm ended, the phalanx still stood. They rose from behind their shields and charged, driving Persians back into their own dead. By nightfall, the hot gates were still Greek. Xerxes' pride shaken, his army humiliated. That night, fires flickered in the Greek camp. The Spartans sharpened blades, sang their songs, laughed again. To Persia, it was madness. To Greece, it was freedom. The second day dawned. Another tide, another storm. Dust, blood, thunder. Again, the Spartans held. Again, Persia broke. But Leonidas knew this was borrowed time. Every spear thrust, every corpse beneath their feet reminded him numbers would win in the end. Yet every hour bought was victory enough. Because Greece was watching. Because courage is contagious. Because in their defiance, the 300 lit a fire no empire could extinguish. 2 days. 2 days when free men held back the might of the world. And in those days of fire, Thermopylae ceased to be a battlefield. It became a beacon. For 2 days, the impossible became reality. The greatest army the world had ever seen hurled itself at the hot gates and broke. Xerxes, the king of kings, looked down from his golden throne and saw not triumph, but humiliation. But courage is not always broken by force. Sometimes it is undone by betrayal. High in the shadows of the mountains, a man watched. Ephialtes, twisted in body, hunched since birth. A Greek, but not embraced by his people. He longed for glory, for a place among the Spartans, to lock his shield into the wall of bronze. But Sparta had denied him. His deformity left gaps, and a gap in the phalanx was death. Leonidas had spoken to him without cruelty, only truth. You cannot hold the shield. You cannot protect the man beside you. And if you cannot protect him, you cannot stand as a Spartan. To Leonidas, it was law. To Ephialtes, it was rejection. And rejection curdled into rage. When Persian gold gleamed, when whispers promised him the honor Sparta denied, he listened. They offered him what he craved, not shame, but recognition. And so he revealed it. A hidden path. A goat track winding through the mountains. Narrow, treacherous, but real. A way to circle behind the hot gates. A way to turn the fortress into a trap. Pause here. Ask yourself, if you had been denied the honor you craved, would you resist the whispers of empire? Or would you trade loyalty for the taste of glory? That night, torches flickered along the ridges. Guided by Ephialtes, the immortals marched. A serpent of fire sliding silently above the pass. The hot gates, once impregnable, had been betrayed. At dawn, Greek scouts saw movement. Alarm spread. The Persians were behind them. The jaws of the trap had closed. Leonidas understood at once. No rage, no curses, only clarity. Thermopylae was never a battle to be won. It was a stand to be made. Now, the end would come sooner. He gathered his men. He told allies to withdraw, to live, to fight another day. Many left, but not all. The Thespians chose to stay, though no law bound them. They chose death over dishonor. And the Spartans? They did not hesitate. From the first step on the march, their fate had been sealed. Now the final hour was here. Leonidas may have spoken then. Perhaps he reminded them of their sons, their city, their place in history. Or perhaps he said nothing at all, because no words were needed. Each man already knew. Each man had already accepted. This is the cruelty of Thermopylae. Not that Sparta was crushed by numbers, but that it was undone by one of its own. And Ephialtes? He received his reward, gold, favor, the empire's smile. But history remembers differently. His very name, Ephialtes, became a curse. It came to mean nightmare. He had sought glory and found infamy. He wanted remembrance, and he received it but as a traitor for all time. Now think of Leonidas. If you were in his place, knowing the enemy was behind you, knowing death was certain, would you flee? Or would you lock your shield and face the end with unbroken eyes? Leonidas chose to stay. The 300 chose to stay. The Thespians chose to stay. The past that had been a fortress was now a tomb, but it was a tomb chosen willingly. And in that choice, they ceased to be mortal. They became immortal. Dawn crept over the third day at Thermopylae. The mountains stood silent, as if holding their breath. The sea hissed against the rocks. In the Greek camp, Leonidas knew the end had come. The Persians had the path. The immortals were descending from the mountains. Soon, the Spartans would be surrounded. Leonidas gathered his men. He did not offer illusions. He did not promise survival. He spoke the truth. Death was certain, but not meaningless. Their stand would echo through Greece, through history. Some say he told them to eat well that morning. Tonight, we dine in Hades. Others say he said nothing because no words were needed. Each man had already chosen his fate the moment he left Sparta. Now imagine yourself among them. Would you tremble, knowing the trap was closing? Or would you tighten your grip on the spear, determined to carve your name into eternity? The Spartans chose the second, and so they prepared. They combed their hair, polished their armor, groomed themselves as if for a festival. To outsiders, madness. To Spartans, ritual. If they were to die, they would meet death as warriors calm, ordered, proud. Then came the Persians. The drums roared, the ground shook. Wave after wave surged forward, but the Spartans did not wait. With a cry that tore the sky, they charged. Spears leveled, shields locked. The wall of bronze smashed into the tide. The clash was thunder. Spears shattered, shields cracked, blood sprayed across the stone. Persians fell, trampled beneath their own. The Spartans drove them back, step by brutal step. Would you have the strength to hold the line as brothers fell beside you, blood soaking into the earth? while the tide pressed harder with every breath. They held, but numbers cannot be denied forever. One by one, the Spartans fell, each death a spark, igniting fury in the living. They closed ranks over the dead, refusing to yield an inch. Leonidas was everywhere. His spear flashed, his shield struck, his voice carried above the chaos. He fought not as a king, but as a brother. His presence held the line together. And then it happened. The king was struck. Arrows, spears' accounts differ, but all agree. Leonidas fell. The Spartans roared. They fought like lions to protect his body. They would not let Persia claim him. They fought until the ground itself was buried in corpses. When their spears splintered, they drew swords. When swords dulled, they used daggers. When daggers broke, they fought with rocks, with bare hands, with teeth. No surrender, no retreat, only defiance. At last, the survivors were driven to the hill of Kolonos, their backs to the earth, their faces to the sea of enemies. They formed one final circle of shields, surrounded, outnumbered, beyond imagination. And still, they fought. The sky darkened again with arrows. This time, no laughter, only silence, only resolve. The storm fell. The last 300 were gone, but Thermopylae was already won in spirit. Though Leonidas and his men lay dead, their defiance carved itself into history. They had bought Greece time. They had lit a fire that would burn at Salamis, at Plataea. They had shown the world that freedom can stand against empire, and their tombstone bore words simple and eternal. Stranger, tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their laws. They died, but in dying, they became immortal. When the dust settled, Persia held the pass. Leonidas was dead. His 300 were gone. The Thespians who chose to stay gone. To Xerxes, it was victory. The road into Greece lay open, and yet, history does not call Thermopylae a Persian triumph. It calls it a Greek legend, because not all victories are measured in land gained, and not all defeats are losses. Thermopylae was loss in flesh, but it was triumph in fire. Word spread swiftly. Farmers whispered it in their fields. Sailors carried it across the Aegean. Poets recited it in dim halls. They told of men who laughed when arrows blotted out the Sunday, of men who fought not for survival, but for honor, of a king who fell, yet never bent the knee. And something shifted. For the first time, Greeks began to see themselves not as fractured cities, but as one people. Sparta's sacrifice gave Athens the time to build its fleet. That fleet would crush Persia at Salamis. Months later, hoplites would stand at Plataea and end Xerxes' dream of conquering Europe. Would those victories have come without Thermopylae? Or did the blood spilled at the hot gates ignite the courage that made them possible? But the legacy of Thermopylae reaches beyond strategy. It gave the world a symbol. Generations would look back and see not Persia's might, but Greece's defiance. They would see that freedom, once tasted, cannot be extinguished by fear. They would see that the worth of a life is not in its length, but in what it stands for. On the hill where the last Spartans fell, the Greeks raised a stone. The words carved into it were simple, almost stark. Stranger, tell the Spartans that we lie here, obedient to their laws. Not written for kings, not written for generals, written for travelers, for strangers. For you, close your eyes. Imagine walking that path today. The mountains still cast their long shadows. The sea still murmurs against the rocks. The wind carries silence over the stones. And then, you read the words. What would you feel? Pride? Sorrow? Or perhaps a question rising quietly in your chest? When my Thermopylae comes, will I stand? Thermopylae became more than history. It became myth. The story we tell whenever the few face the many, whenever courage defies inevitability. Empires fall, gold fades, armies vanish into dust, But courage endures. The Persians won the field. The Spartans won eternity. And so, when you hear the name Thermopylae, remember this. It is not the story of defeat. It is the story of men who chose death over chains, honor over breath, and in that choice became immortal.